First of all, I really want to thank you and the whole team of the Danilo seminar because I mean my research or my time off from my normal work started here last year and ends here this year. Maybe I should give you a little bit of background. I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner. I've worked for a long time in different international organizations, and I'm going back to international organizations. But I've worked in Ukraine for some times, and when the war started in Ukraine, I was in another country, and I basically felt that I needed to understand what was going on. So I decided to take a sabbatical, which I've used doing research, first of all to understand myself, what was going on, and on the other side to put together this information in a way that you will find probably not particularly academic, but is targeted to the kind of policy-making environment. Maybe a few steps back than Ander Aslund the other day, but that's what I was interested in. So. In the spring of last year, I was in Ukraine with the organization I was working with at the moment, and basically, I was part of a fact-finding mission. We were looking at how the security situation was evolving in the country. And one of the think tank people I spoke to in Kiev told me, well, I mean, civil society has emerged as a security actor, and this is a fact that we have to reckon with now. And that's where I wanted to understand what it means. What it means to have civil society as a security actor in Ukraine. So I've spent time looking at how the security sector has changed in general after Maidan. Now, after the discussion that we had yesterday with Luke, and I felt a bit sensitive about the concept of civil society, and you will see that here I'm not using a particularly strictly academic understanding of civil society because I'm looking at, here I define it as an intermediate layer between the state and the individual, which of course goes outside market and the family. And individuals who mobilize voluntarily, they do it in structured organizations, but also in spontaneous grassroots networks, and they engage with the purpose of doing activities towards what they think is their public good. So, I mean, their understanding of public good. In a way, I mean, there is a distinction that is growing, that is increasingly perceptible, that I perceived in Ukraine, between this гражданское общество, which is in general, I mean, society altogether, and the гражданский sector, which is instead structured civil society organizations. And I've been looking at гражданское in general terms. Okay, so in general, I mean, my argument is that the way how civil society has mobilized through the Maidan, and especially after the Maidan, has turned it, I mean, civil society, into a potential change agent. I mean, of course, the weakness, I mean, with Dominique yesterday, we were talking about the collapse of the state institutions. I mean, it was a temporary collapse, but I mean, for a few months, the state was failed, basically, and it was perceptible everywhere in Ukraine. Created in a way the need for civil society to intervene and perform functions that are generally attributed to the state, security, but also opened a window of opportunity. So, and the window of opportunity is given by the possibility for civil society to perform activities of democratic oversight, introduce discourse of transparency and accountability, and as a result, restore people trust. All this can happen in the long term, and I mean, this is why I talk about a potential change agent. Civil society becomes sustainable as a potential, as a change agent if the state actually provides with functional representation and gives the civil society an opportunity to have regular, and this is important, regular and meaningful access to decision-making processes. And so, I mean, civil society has become de facto a security actor because the situation required it in 3 areas. And I will not go into very much detail. Maybe we'll talk about this in the question and answers session. In 3 areas, I was saying. In the hard security field with Sama Barona and then the volunteer battalions, with the logistic and procurement, and with activities of democratic oversight. This democratic oversight is actually the element that I find more interesting and on which I would like to spend 2 more words, because I think this is the element that goes beyond the emergency situation and actually makes civil society an important actor, as I was saying, a potential agent of change in the longer period, capable to basically contribute to the consolidation of democracy in Ukraine. There are 2 models of, if you want, I've detected 2 models of institutional representation or in institutional interaction, if you want, between civil society and the state structures. And one is basically the emergence, the establishment of, they called it, Ukrainska Pravda called it a virus in the Ministry of Defense. It was a group of 9-10 people who from January 2015 on have been involved particularly in the procurement of and the logistics of the Ministry of Defense. And in a way, I mean, they most of them came from business. They were all selected through interviews, a regular process. They were given civil servant status, but of course, I mean, they were an external part. They were perceived to be an external part inside the Ministry of Defense. They adopted a number of procedures that came from business, some of them to introduce accountability, to make the procurement process faster and more transparent. I mean, a lot of these tenders were advertised on Facebook, on the internet. The results were given publicly. So they were inside the ministry. This doesn't necessarily mean that they were accepted by other staff members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they had their own channel directly with, actually one of the members of this team has become Deputy Minister of Defense, and they had a direct channel to the President and the Minister themselves. The question, I mean, so this is a kind of constructive example. The question is whether this is sustainable. When I went last time to Ukraine, which was June, July, already people who had been supportive of this engagement were asking themselves the first questions: how long this could go on, whether you could keep working with 2 parallel structures at the same time. Minister of Interior. We were talking actually, I think, with Olga the other day about these civil society councils that actually were established already during the Yanukovych year, both at the regional level and at the national level. And at the national level, they were on the side of different ministries. I think almost every ministry has got one of these advisory boards that includes a number of civil society representatives. Now, with the Ministry of Interior, I met a number of people who had been part of these advisory boards. They're very reputable civil or human rights experts. Some of them were previous policemen who had been working, for example, in the Ministry of Interior during Yuri Lutsenko's tenure, and had established a human rights section within the Ministry of Interior. Then anyway, I mean, they had a very solid expertise on the question. They had been involved in the process of decision making in the Ministry of Interior in the very first stages after the Maidan. But from February, March on, this council was no longer summoned. The Deputy Minister of Interior, who's been in charge of reforming the police, she should have actually called for this council, but this didn't happen anymore. So basically, these people were sidelined in the process of working out new legislation for the reform of the police. And as I mentioned the other day when we were talking with Ander Asron, I mean, I think the reform of the police is one of the elements which required a particular wide sense of inclusion and participation from civil society. But I'll tell you more later on. So what I wanted to get to is that the impression that I got when I went last time, July, was that in a way civil society had hit a glass ceiling. So after a first phase, when actually their assistance, their presence, was not only useful but needed. At a point, I mean, state structures had reorganized themselves and had imposed, some sort of exclusion from the whole process. And this actually opens a number of questions. Which I think are interesting it's interesting to generalize them, to look at the whole process of democratic reforms. When we talk about civil society, which civil society are we talking about? I mean, some of the people I met or I interviewed were actually challenging the democratic character of civil society, of those actors who had been associating themselves with these advisory boards. And even they claimed that by taking a very laid back approach, they were slowing down the process of reforms. And then my question is, do we need to be effective or do we need to be inclusive? I mean, there are some areas where you really need to have as many people around the table as possible. And again, so who makes the decisions, institutions or civil society? How can civil society participate effectively or keep participating in the process of reforms? And then the last point is control versus oversight. I mean, what is actually the role of civil society in this process? I mean, do they just perform the народный control, as everyone has been calling it after the Maidan, or do they have a more active role in deciding which way policies have to go? But I'll leave this open and